Boards, games. We might be talking about auctions where it's turn order until we pass, but we're not gonna shout. In this auction, it keeps going round and round until a winner has been found. Because if you're passing, then you're not a winner. And you'll have to admit that you're a loser, but only as relates to this one auction. And you might be a winner of the gamer overall. That's still an option. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good whatever it is, wherever you are. 10 a.m. is UK time for Busy Beats and Boards Game Bladder, episode 971. We're pondering mechanics again. Auctions, turn order until pass. I think this is the penultimate auction that we've got.
Right. What's the one after this? Are we doing a review? Or is that actually another auction to do?
Oh no, you're right. This is the last auction. Should we have an auction review after this, or should we go straight on to automatic resource growth?
Let's go straight on.
Yes, I agree.
We've covered a lot.
Enough things to share.
Yeah.
So quickly share my windows. We are, for those who are unaware, working through this list. We've gotten barely down the list, and there's still like another 4 pages to go.
Yeah, but we are, I think, does that mean we're actually going to reach the end of A?
Good grief. Oh, we are definitely going to reach the end of A in 2 weeks' time. And we have talked about so many auctions. If you're interested in more of these, then check out, I guess, on my YouTube channel. There's a search bar, and you can search for Alan Paull or Pondering Mechanisms, I guess, but mechanics rather.
Pondering, yes.
But first of all, let's take a tiny step back and let's talk about recent highlights, living life and seeing the sights, recent highlights, playing games and other delights, recent highlights. I have, not done very well at photosynthesis online. I'm only number 7 on Board Game Arena.
Only number 7? Oh dear.
But I used to be number 4. But in a couple of games, I mean, then like 3 players, it just adds this element of, well, now if I start, I mean, look, there is player chaos, and it makes sense that that's yet another thing to avoid, and it's absolutely a skill to hone. And like for sure saying, okay, I'm in a good place, but potentially because of the positioning, maybe they'll attack me from the top and they'll attack me from the bottom. It's all about the positioning in photosynthesis.
Yes.
I think I've gotten to the point where I've learned, at least for the first round, it's fairly clear with optimal placement what my actual actions are, but then the actual placement is the I still don't know. And I still have to think about, okay, I go there, and then they're going to cast the shadow, which is the heart of the game, and it's such a delightful thing. But I think after all my current games finish, I might stop playing 3-player photosynthesis for a couple of months because it's just annoying me.
But the key question is, does photosynthesis grow on you? That's the key question.
I loved it from the start.
That's good.
The other thing, honestly, I was very distracted by personal stuff. I went to the issue with my face, and I went to see the beautician who'd waxed me on Sunday, which I think might be the reason. And then, like, they gave me a lot of advice and helped me out. But yeah, that was definitely a highlight, even though I felt quite fatigued and overwhelmed by the whole process. But yeah, other than that, yesterday was just, having lunch / dinner, and playing Board Game Arena.
That's fairly weak for a highlight, isn't it? Lunch and dinner.
Yeah.
Unless it was a really special one.
Alex says, if photosynthesis is growing on you, you might need a good wash.
Excellent. Yes. Indeed.
And good morning to you.
Good morning,
what are some of your recent highlights, Alex? What are some of your recent highlights, Alan?
Well, not yesterday. Yesterday we did the mowing, but then that's not a highlight really either.
Well, it's a notable achievement.
To be fair, we're currently living in Ramsey, so we've moved out. We're currently living in Ramsey, so we were mowing our actual home garden, which is a curious thing, because when we finish the mowing, usually we can look out the window and say, great, look, because we've got quite a large lawn. Hooray, the lawn's mown. Now we can't even do that. If I look out the window in our rental property, the grass is long. The grass is long, and I've just spent several hours with Charlie mowing, and the grass is still. No, never mind. But that's not a highlight. But
wait, did you mow in your?
We mowed in our actual home back in War Boys, okay. But here we don't have to do any mowing here, so it's overgrown. Oh well, never mind. So it's a bit curious. But no, we went to Bacon at the weekend, which is a games playing convention down in Exeter, or just outside Exeter. And that was good fun. We normally go for 4 or 5 days, and we have a couple of days before and a couple of days afterward. We walk around Dartmoor or Exmoor or something. But this time around, because we moved into this place in Ramsey, we decided to have only a short stay. So we only had 2 nights away. So we travelled on Thursday and came back on Saturday afternoon. But several good things happened, which is worth reporting. Firstly, I taught War of the Three Sanchos to Paul Grogan, because he's going to do a video. In fact, I'm making a note. Sort out when the video is going to be done, because he's going to do a video and we need to schedule it. So Gaming Rules will be doing the playthrough video for War of the Three Sanchos for the Game Fan campaign, which will be later on in the year, probably July. But also on the Friday, I spent a whole day just doing complex war games, which I've not done for ages. So literally, I spent the whole day playing three games. Playing part of 3 games, all of which were new, being taught by a friend called Richard, who is just an expert.
Richard Klein?
No.
Richard that we probably don't know. Carry on.
Yes. Good, I think. So we played Inferno 1259 to 61, which is it's set in medieval Italy. It's the Guelphs against the Ghibellines. I apologise for any pronunciation. And it is a proper war game with logistics and taxation. So some of the important things you have to do is before you can send your army out, you have to get carts which will carry your food for you. You have to get the food put in. So there's lots of logistics and stuff. And it's not just a question of move some troops and you besiege somewhere. You have to do all the prep for it. So it's got a huge amount of
so it delves into the aspects of war that maybe lots of other war games do not.
Yes, it gives you that whole strategic context and political context of the whole thing. It's a simulation.
That really sounds good.
It's really good. Yeah.
Crack on, and let's maybe. Shall we talk about auctions in general? Like, because we're not doing a wrap-up episode, let's just talk about auctions. Why are auctions a brilliant thing? They're a little thing which is brilliant. I mean, I just think that when you've got a game, when you're designing a game, I mean, auctions make it inherently interactive. It makes it play differently for who, depending on who else is at the table. What other advantages of auctions are there in a game?
Well, we've mentioned this a lot. It's a way of distributing resources where the players effectively decide on the value of the things that are being distributed.
Sure. So why is it good for the players to determine the value rather than the designer just saying this is always costing 5?
Because it's giving the players decision points all the way along. That's the key. That's the key thing. It's player interaction as you make decisions, and that's the great thing about them. And the one we've got now, Turn Order to Pass, is possibly simplest, or at least one of the most common ways of doing auctions in board games. Because you could argue it's a bit intuitive, but we need to define what it is before we go
But
too far.
Alex says auctions can add a huge
Yeah.
amount of depth with very simple rules. I think that leans into the interactivity. I mean, I find that any rules that are so dependent upon the other player's decision points, I mean, the shadows in photosynthesis, the you know, when people can, it's inherently fairly granular. I mean, sure, one auction by itself might be quite chunky in terms of what you can actually bid, but then you do that over and over and over. There's not just going to be one auction in the auction game. And so that becomes a really interesting point where now it's like, okay, I get to not only think about what's the correct price for me, but what's the correct price for you, and do I raise the price just so that you get it? I mean, yeah.
Yes, I would say, I mean, as I'm a systems thinking type person, it having a system for distributing resources which uses auctions gives you lots of emergent properties. Hence, as Alex has said, huge amounts of depth, and it's those emergent properties, and it's the different types of auctions that give you different types of emergent properties, and that's so. If you've got an English
talking
auction,
about different types of auctions.
Yeah.
Do you have the book beside you?
I do. I have.
Would you like to
let's read out the description, right?
And meanwhile, we'll see what Board Game Geek says and how they differ.
Starting with one player and going in turn order, players may raise the current bid or pass. When all players but one have passed, the player remaining in the auction is the winner. Normally, players that pass may not re-enter the auction. However, allowing the re-entry is a variation that is not uncommon. I think, isn't that identical?
That is identical to. So there was no editing done for when it was put onto Board Game Geek. Some of these have mild, very small edits, which kind of shows you maybe how the thinking differed. Now, for all we've said about this maybe being the most common, I would like to address the issue that there's 57 games listed. Do you think that that's because of not enough games being tagged with this, or do you think it's actually less common than we intuitively believe?
That's a good question. Maybe it's less common than we intuitively think. I think maybe it's because it's the simplest. If you talk about auction, people board gamers will often think, oh yeah, well you just bid one, but bid when it's your turn, you keep going to everybody. It's a kind of natural. There's no such thing as a natural auction, is there? But it's a simple and well-structured way of running an auction, which doesn't require an auctioneer, and that's key. And that's probably why it feels like there are quite a lot of games that have it, I guess. And there are quite a lot of popular games. I mean, Powergrid has it. Through the Ages has it in particular places, and things like, I think, does Modern Art have to? I'm not sure.
Yes, it does.
Look,
I'm going to just so looking at sealed bid, there are 96 for sealed bid. There are 27 for once around. There's 26 for multiple lots.
It is common.
There's 19 for fixed placement. There's 7 for English auctions. There's 5 for Dutch priority. 37 for Dutch, and 10 for dexterity auctions. So I mean, maybe it's just, and for auction/bidding, we've got 4,858. So what I'm getting from this is, because these auction/bidding games, clearly they are auction/bidding, but they haven't really tagged. Yes, and so I think it's that there's a lot of untagged things, but even as it is the second most common as listed on Board Game Geek, and I think that it makes it, like, when we look at Through the Ages, it's got Dutch auction, but it doesn't have turn order until pass.
There. Alex is mentioning that over 4,000 uncategorized auction games, which is true.
Yes,
and I think that's because that's a feature of classification. If you've got a nice heading auction bidding, it's easiest just to shove that in and not bother not bother to look more closely at what the type of auction is. And we know also, having looked at some of our other auction ones, a lot of them are miscategorized as well. So it's not, in an individual case, it's not necessarily reliable, but overall it does show that the turn order to a pass.
I think I could absolutely believe that this is the second most common, and that sealed bid has overtaken it, especially as I think as time goes on, people have realized, hey, auctions can slow the game down. And so if this isn't the key feature of the game, let's just do a sealed bid and get it in there.
Or indeed a draft as a completely alternative, but similar method. Because in a way, if your turn order to a pass auction is fairly straightforward and there isn't much bidding against each other, you might as well do a draft. And you could argue that Powergrid might work. I've not tried it. It might work with drafting. Who knows?
It could. As we crack on, please do comment, ask questions from like follow. That is the reason that we do these things live. And thank you very much, Alex, for engaging. But as always with these shows, we're going to start off with a few examples. And we're going to look at examples which I've picked a couple, Alan's picked a couple, and shall we start off with Powergrid?
Well, yes, okay, let's start with Powergrid. Powergrid, well, it's because it's one of the most popular, well, at least on BGG, in BGG terms anyway, one of the most popular games, and a main part of it, and in fact you could almost call it the focus of the whole game really, is auctioning power plants. And it uses turn order to pass, and the
power plants.
The power plants get more expensive as the game goes on, but also you get more power out of them, and you've got nice variations there. It's a good picture there, isn't it?
Well, the power plants don't inherently get more expensive. It's just that people have more capital and are willing to spend more for them.
The base value gets more. The base value, you have to bid at least the base value.
Oh, I completely forgot that. It's been a while. Thank you for keeping me right.
But it's been a while for me too, to be honest. And you get the nice variations you get here. So some of them don't require any fuel, like the one on the left there. Some of them require rubbish, which is the middle one. Some of them require nuclear. Some of them require coal. Some require oil. So there is a resource element. So not only do you auction the power plant, but also you have to buy resources to fire them up and power the cities. So the player interaction here is not just, it's getting a power plant of the type that you want as cheaply as you can, while bearing in mind that there's a constrained number of power plants that come out, and they don't come out in a strict order. Do they actually come out in strict order? Actually, I can't remember.
There is kind of leaning towards an order. So as the game goes on, you always discard the most expensive, and then you take more from the deck. So it tends towards the cheapest available being in there.
And the nice thing about the auction is that you have, I think, 4 power plants, and in the current market, so you can buy them, but you can also see 4 power plants in the future markets. You can't buy them yet, but they're going to come up. So that may well color how you react in your current auction. Now, I would say here, turn order to a pass is nice and simple. Basically, starting with however the game decides however the game decides who's going to put something up for auction. In Powergrid, it's done in player order. So if I'm the first player, I will be the first player to choose a power plant.
One interesting small wrinkle in Powergrid is that the person who initiates the auction is the one who chooses what should go up.
Yes.
And that might be the one that you really want, or it might be your kind of backup option, because people don't get to keep bidding on everything and buying everything. So you might be thinking, well, if I get someone else to buy that, I've got something else that I've only got my eye on. And as you say, the interaction of the auction kind of meshes with the interaction of the resource system, which you can sort of see at the bottom right, where the resources, as people buy it, it becomes more expensive as people sell. It becomes in a very people don't sell it; just kind of replenishes on the board in a very intuitive way. And
I wanted to contrast the simplicity of the turn order until pass methods. In other words, it's my turn, I bid, or I have to bid more than my previous bid, or I pass. If I pass, I'm out for that plant. Now, the contrast with that and the tactical stuff that goes on around it. So, for example, if I'm the first player, I may decide I want to put this one up for auction with no intention of actually bidding. I don't mind winning. I might put it up for auction at the minimum price, knowing that somebody's going to outbid me, in which case I drop out. Because what I want to do is I want to eliminate the other people from the auctions. Because when you bought one plant, you're out. You can't bid for any more. And that's part of the skill of Powergrid, is the tactics you can use in the auctions. And I was saying the emergent properties here. I could put something up. For auction, knowing that somebody's going to overbid my minimum bid, and therefore I don't have to spend any money. I'm not risking anything on that, and that enables me to eliminate my revivals from an auction for the one I actually want. And there's lots of that type of thing in here. For example, another quick example here is because you have to go above the previous bid. I can bid an amount of money, knowing, if I'm lucky, knowing that you can't overbid that, even though you want this particular power plant. So there's a lot of those kind of tactical issues that you tap.
I agree. There's definitely deeper ramifications than you might expect, given the simple rules, and there's a level of emergence. Alex mentioned that their Civ game has sealed bids in. I think it's the most exciting auction on a per second basis, says Alex. And I might actually agree. It is very short, it's very brief, but sealed bids are also the one that kind of get rid of this information coming in from other players. So it does lose a bit of that. But I'm not saying it's the wrong choice for your game. I'm just saying that having an actual turn-based thing, whether it's turns or whether it's real time, but having things progress and having information come in before you make your next bid does definitely add a lot of considerations and value to the strategy.
I would say it's more cerebral, but less dramatic. I think that something like an English auction, or a Dutch auction, or a Civ bid, they're all more dramatic. They have that moment of drama sequence. But with Powergrid, it's a much more calculated type game. Things like how much money I've got. The classic problem, if you like, with Powergrid is that I would have won if I hadn't overpaid by 3 money for that power plant back in turn 6. That kind of thing. It can happen in Powergrid because it's quite a calculated type of game, and it's the auction. It's this particular auction mechanism that supplies that. And you could argue that's a feature rather than a bug, actually, I would say.
Absolutely. Alex, of course, it depends what emotions you're going for. So I think we've probably explored Powergrid enough. So looking at High Society, which I feel is a really interesting turn order until pass auction, because the wrinkle here is that once you bid, you can't remove the coins that you've taken, like the cards that you've taken. So if you look on the bottom left picture here, where it says 6, 10, 15, 20, let's say I bid 6, and then other people bid other numbers, and then eventually I want to bid 15. Well, I can't just pick up my 6 card and then put down a 15. I've got to add to it. And so this means that I'm thinking, okay, this almost pushes it towards a once around auction, because that initial valuation is so integral, and having these small notes becomes so much more valuable because it means that you can add a little bit to what you've already got on the table. And this tiny wrinkle, you can't pick up the cards, or the cards have unique numbers in your hand, but you can't pick them up. You can only add to them. That changes that. What do you think of this small wrinkle?
I like it. I think all of these all of these different games, they have a different wrinkle. You get a different emergent property, if you like, a different restriction on how the auction works, and that's the beauty of, well, when you look at all the auction types we've covered, almost every game has got its own little wrinkle on how to do it, and it makes the games more interesting and fun. And with Reiner Knizia, this is what you are going to get. You're going to get some little wrinkle that just opens up another array of different methods you can use.
Yes, Knizia, I mean, went through their whole auction period, which they came out with. So, I mean, for me, I think that this is my favourite. Some people cite Modern Arts as the best, but like I think High Society for me. Oh wait, I've got the wrong banner up. Sorry.
Look, should be High Society. I think
I want to go back to what I originally wrote. Sorry. I want to go back to what I wrote in the description of this video, which is this the most generic thing? And I think it might be the most generic auction style in a certain sense. It's the one that comes to mind. But because it's this generic base, it then means that you can put this little wrinkle and not have it overwhelm people.
Yeah, same for Powergrid. I mean, with Powergrid, in a way, the main wrinkle is that the person whose turn it is the one who puts the power plant up for auction, and also you have to start at that minimum. There is that minimum bid. You have to start with the minimum cost. So those do colour it.
And then also the way that things emerge, seeing what the next lot might be, and knowing that some of the things are going to go out of the game or to the bottom of the deck. That adds a lot of consideration for the future stuff.
I think there's a reason why we probably think of turn order to a pass as the typical auction for board games, and that's because it is structured. It is. I mean, board games typically are structured in turn order. You have to take a turn, it goes around. So I mean, it's kind of built into the structure of this type of auction is the idea of how you play a board game. So that's why and it doesn't require an auctioneer. I think that's absolutely key. And the moment you require an auctioneer, you've introduced a new element of complexity to the game. Turn order to a pass is simple because you're basically saying to players, look, it's easy. Somebody starts, and there's a mechanism for starting. On your turn, you make a bid or you pass. It's make a bid.
Yeah, anything that's real time really can be fiddly, and even sealed bid. I noticed, like with my game about auctioning cubes, after winning an auction to become the auctioneer, it's not actually the English auction that gets people confused. It's like for non-gamers, like because I've played it with a bunch of people who hardly ever play games. It's the sealed bid auction that they're like, oh, and then it's like, oh, have you actually put down your cards? Oh no, I've not put down my cards yet. And that's when is everyone ready? And once you've played like a couple of turns, it's fine. You just say, oh, is everyone ready? Great, then flip over. But there is something.
Mechanically, sealed bids are relatively easy, but actually doing a sealed bid is very hard. You've got to do a value which you can't change without any knowledge of what other people are going to put. So the danger with sealed bids, which is always the case, is that you may be just completely massively overbidding, or it's something you really want, but you didn't realize what value other people were putting on it, in which case you are massively undervaluing. So those are the thing, if you like, difficult
considerations that you need to make.
There are the considerations, but they will make it harder for new players because until you've played a game a few times, you very often haven't.
But I'm not just talking about strategic complexity. I'm talking about complexity in execution for someone who's never done that before.
Yes. That's why I say I think with board games, turn order to a pass is probably
but I think that complexity in my game is also accentuated by the fact that you're allowed to put down multiple cards, which does add a weird wrinkle. But let's go to a game that does have both sealed bids and turn order until pass, where we've discussed the sealed bid. Well, all the cards are unique, so it's real easy. And but the first half of the game is entirely turn order until pass. The small wrinkle being that when you pass, you get half your money back of what you've bid, and you get not the best thing. So you will get one of the properties, no matter what. And if the properties are, for example, 1, 2, 3, 29, then you really want to be the winner of that. But conversely, if the properties are 27, 28, 29, 30, like in another game, then you don't really care. That would actually be a less interesting auction, but more likely it will be something like 5, 16, 27, 28, at which point you've got to evaluate, well, do I want to just pass straight off the bat and take the 5? Do I want to put one coin in to try and get at least a 16? And once it's up to the top 2, you really want to be second winner in order to get that half your money back. And so this is, again, turn order until pass with a massive wrinkle to the point that they've mutated it. And then you have the consideration of how much you should bid to inflate the value for the winning player. Yes, absolutely.
Yes. I mean, that's very similar to Powergrid, because in Powergrid, you may want to be in an auction in order to force the cost of the plant up so that somebody can't buy it really cheaply. But of course, the danger there is they let you have it. And if you don't want it, then you're in that risky situation of trying to force the price up and ending up with something you don't actually want. So, and again, that's that emergent property of a tactic which you get through these implementations of this particular auction type.
And I think it's really interesting, the combination of multiple lots and turn order until pass with this. I want to call it unique, although it might not technically be unique, but certainly unusual and incredibly rare. Get half your money back when you pass and everyone gets something. That combination all fuses together to make a wonderful game. And I think, honestly, Stefan Dora with this design, I can't say enough good stuff about it. You could just go through the first half of that game, and that itself would be a really interesting game. And then the second half brings it all together, and it's sorry. But for sale, I just wanted to point out again that we've got a fairly, like High Society, we've got this fairly basic system upon which you can add playful elements.
And it sounds like I don't think I've even played For Sale. I may have played it maybe once or twice, which I'm missing it. It's got a lot of tension in it. It's got huge amounts of tension in, which is fantastic. And actually, and the fourth example we're going to use, which is Through the Ages, I think is a good contrast to this. Through the Ages, the main auction, if you like, in Through the Ages is buying the cards, which is a variant of a Dutch auction. I think we discussed that back in Dutch auction things. But the bit where you have the turn order till pass is when you're buying territories. So if in Through the Ages you put cards in a pile, and they come out when people take political action at the first of their turn, at the start of their turn. And if one of these cards comes out at the start of somebody's turn and it's a territory, that territory is up for auction. And usually they give you some really good things. They might give you more blue cubes, more orange cubes, and if you know the game, you know what those mean. But basically giving you some stuff. Sometimes they straightforward give you victory points. So they're usually very valuable, but you have to auction to buy them, and you're buying them with military strength or colonization cards from hand. So like a lot of these games, like with Powergrid, you've got hidden information about money, although that's calculable. With Through the Ages, you've got hidden information from the political cards you've got in your hand. So your opponent doesn't know whether your cards you've got are going to give you bonuses on buying territories, or whether there's something which is completely irrelevant to that particular process. So if I've got 4 cards, you don't know, I might have three cards that give me bonuses on territories, or I might have none. So you have to bid, and if you win, you pay that amount of military force, but i.e. you're disbanding military units and or cards. Well, you have to disband at least one unit, but you're also paying cards. So the territory may be sufficiently valuable, like that 11 historic territory there, which is 11 points, you may decide that's sufficiently valuable that I'll spend a lot of my military, leaving myself vulnerable later on. But the auctions, I think there's not a lot of tension in this, because it's very clear how much you as an individual can spend. And very often it's quite little. It's not a huge amount unless you've invested very heavily in military. So very often you're in a situation where I know I can win this because I've got more military than anybody else, and I'll just keep going, incrementing until everybody else drops out. Or on the other hand, you may decide, well, I don't really want that. I don't want to spend anything on that at all. I'll just not bother to bid at all. Let somebody else have it. Or I've got lots of cards. I'll bid my cards and a minimum military. So the decision making here, I think, is fairly, I was going to say vanilla. It's fairly straightforward.
Yeah,
so you can assess the value, and there's not so much. I don't think there's quite so much tension as you get, for example, in for sale. It's quite an interesting. It's an interesting way of distributing them, but I feel it's one of those areas quite rarely in through the ages where they kind of thought, well, let's just bung an auction in here and we'll let people sort out the value. It doesn't feel like a very well thought out mechanism to me, because it's not got a huge amount of interest, and actually they happen fairly swiftly. To be fair, it's usually fairly quick, and it usually becomes fairly obvious what's going to happen.
I mean,
and only very rarely do you have a dramatic auction, I think.
It sounds like the two that I mentioned they are all about the auction. That's what they are. They are games of auctions and very little else. Powergrid, the auction is a fairly big part of it.
The art auction is central to Powergrid, yes.
But here, it seems like very much just a supporting mechanism. And it could be that it could have been a draft, but like it feels like one of those things where the auctions maybe work as well as anything else.
That's correct. I think that's right. They work as well as anything else. I think that's it. I mean, I think I can see why they put them in there, because you are injecting another way of getting victory points. And there is certainly if you're going for a strategy of getting lots of territories, and then you'll be buying military, getting tactics cards out, you'll be amassing these colonization cards in order to win territory. So there is definitely valid strategy for doing that. But on the other hand, are lots of players going to do that? Is there going to be a lot of competition for these? And I think my own view of this is that it's not as dramatic as it could be. It's not the decisions aren't as important. They're not as interesting.
So then the question becomes: did it need to become dramatic? I mean, are people playing through the ages hoping for drama, or are they playing through the ages hoping to have a series of considered decisions, at the end of which they hopefully have some vague score which at least vaguely reflects the strength of their decision-making process? Maybe.
And in a way, I suppose you could say that the drama comes in the strategies from the fact you don't know exactly when they're going to come out. So the difficulty might be you seed the event deck. Each player seeds the event deck. You may seed the event deck with a territory, but you may find that it comes out at a time when you haven't managed to increase your military enough to actually succeed in obtaining it. So there's a bit of chicanery there, and I agree with Alex. They should feel dramatic, and I feel that it's sometimes a bit of a damp squib in Through the Ages in this particular aspect. Mind you, there's lots. I mean, I'm not saying that Through the Ages is bad, and I'm not saying necessarily that this isn't a perfectly reasonable way of distributing these resources. Those it's fine, and it has the merit of being straightforward and quick, and maybe that's what they're aiming at. Maybe having a more dramatic auction or a more knife edge auction isn't what they wanted in the design.
And it sounds like the other thing that makes it less dramatic is that there's not enough granularity to really make it that exciting a consideration of, is the correct value 11 or... I mean, maybe maybe this was one where it really should have been a simultaneous bid, sealed bid.
I think possibly that is the case. The difficulty, a sealed bid would be quite interesting, because in this particular case, you see, if one player, and typically it'd be only one, if you've got a 2-player game or a 3-player game, it's probably only one player who is going for this strategy of a lot of military and buying territories, in which case the other 2 players, well, if they can get one at some point cheaply, they might do it. It becomes more straightforward, I think. If the territories come out, I'm not that interested. The other player probably buy it. I might want to bid a little bit to force the price up, but I'm very unlikely to get it. So, in a way, the other player or the other 2 players may be just trying to force the price up a bit, and that's it. Which is not quite so interesting as 2 players really gunning for getting that particular territory.
Mm-mm.
And I would compare it with For Sale or High Society, where winning that auction is an absolutely critical part of the whole game.
Alex says, I like a mixture, some bidding open, some hidden. Which games are you thinking of? Obviously, For Sale that we've talked about comes to mind, but which other games would you cite as examples of this? But I think we've had enough examples, and let's. So how does it impact a game? How will it affect the experience at the table? As typical, we've explored these questions throughout our conversation, but let's really try to nail it down. For me, it makes it more methodical. It makes it it's easier to explain the rules of this, I think. And you don't have to worry about tiebreakers. It's probably the simplest auction to implement in a game that's not really about auctions.
The mechanics of the auction are in this particular case, I think, are the simplest of the auctions. It doesn't require an auctioneer, and you can explain it in 10 seconds, and people will know. Oh, I just have to do this, which is fine. However, the impact depends on the wrinkles, which we've already discussed. So you can have those tactical situations where if I know how much my opponent can bid and they have to exceed my bid, then I can bid that amount, in which case they can't bid. So there are lovely ways in which you can manipulate the auction tactically, and that can affect, and the effect on the experience of the table is that one. And Powergrid, I think, is one of the best for that. So being in that situation in Powergrid where what I want to do is get the power plant that I want for base cost, and that's what my tactic is going to be to do. That is really interesting and sometimes quite hard to do, but that attracts people to that particular game and how that is implemented in that game. I mean, I would also say that there are some downsides, which in some cases may be more a perception of a bug rather than an actual bug. For example, if I value a power plant at a certain, say I value a power plant at 20 and I'm not prepared to go above 20, the situation may arise where I cannot actually bid 20 because somebody else has bid 20 before I can, which means that I'm forced out of the auction literally because I couldn't make the bid that I wanted to bid simply because of turn order.
Yes, that's a fair point.
Then again, Powergrid does ameliorate that by the fact that effectively you're deciding on the turn order between you. You're deciding on the turn. So maybe you should have made sure that you were the one who was first in the player order. So
and actually in Powergrid, doing badly enough so that you are in a advantageous position in turn order is a big part of that game, so that then you can leapfrog everyone at the end, of course. And I think that one thing that you've not mentioned is if I'm not interested in something, then turn order until pass feels like the most boring to not really be a part of.
It can be, particularly if people are implementing, but because it's always bid one over the opponent. If you want to get the lowest price, the best strategy in a turn order until pass is to bid one more than the previous bid. Which means that if people start really low, and nowhere near the value that anybody's actually got, then it can drag because people just incrementing one at a time. So if most players have valued something at 20, but somebody starts at 1 and everybody just increments 1 every time, it's going to take several rounds to get up to the 20.
True. And so that's where the advantage of having some sort of fixed currency, so that you feel like, okay, actually, there's a reason why 6 is a really good number to bid, because I've got a card that's worth 6, for example, or
a minimum
in
value.
Powergrid, where you've got the minimum bid, as you mentioned, where you have to bid at least that.
I'm fairly sure that the reason for the minimum bid in Powergrid is that specific issue. I imagine they probably had an early playtest version where they didn't have the minimum value on there, and people were just, and the auctions would have been absolutely horrendous, because some of those power
depending
plants
on
are worth
the
like 40
people
or 50.
involved.
Yes, but you know,
I played with someone who used to always bid in prime numbers.
Oh, right, so that's an interesting.
Just as a quirk. I mean, they would sometimes change it if it was clearly a bad move strategically, but if it was a case of, well, this is clearly worth somewhere between 10 and 20, they would say, well, okay, I'll bid 11, and then
yes, of course there's a tactic there. If you're playing against experienced players, you may decide to just cut to the chase and you may decide to cut to the chase and just bid the value that you put on something regardless. So you're not intending to save money, because you know your other players are experienced, they're not going to let you have it cheaply, so I'll just bid 20 anyway.
And there can be a bit of scaring off, but these are well pointed out. Now, how versatile is it? Which games will it fit? What will it work well with? To me, this feels like I might have been a bit unkind with my word generic, but if we can agree on that word, I think by being generic, it can fit and adapt to what's around it.
Yes.
And it can be very massaged. And I would say that arguably this maybe or sealed bid auctions are the most easy ones to implement. I would say this is the most easy to implement into the game, because you don't even need to worry about tie breaks.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't go with sealed bids. I think although sealed bids are mechanically fairly simple, they do stress players out. Some players can't handle sealed bids very easily because they're just in the dark about what the value should be. But this one is I think that's one of the reasons why Through the Ages has it, because it's really easy to implement. It's straightforward. It's relatively quick, as long as you haven't got large values or a lot of granularity, and it's readily accessible to most.
From a design
players.
point of view, going back to Through the Ages, maybe they saw simultaneous action as too different from the rest of the game, because then sealed bids would inject a kind of calculation that you don't get anywhere else, so it might be seen as too much of a divorce.
Yes, I think it's easy to implement, and here it's not. And I think, as we said, some of the games you can implement this where it's not the central feature of the game. And Through the Ages, it's a bit of a kind of adjunct. I mean, it's a method of. Well, the problem is, if you've got this territory card that's come up, there's only one lot. How do you distribute that lot? I mean, you could just give it to a player, but you've got to have some mechanism for player decision making in there. And so some form of auction is the only thing you've really got. A sealed bid is probably harder to implement, I think. So a turn order to a party is just relatively straightforward to implement.
And simultaneous action or sealed bids does have a very different flavor to a typical turn-based strategic game. And so if you're trying to keep it in the same family, I think we're agreed turn order until pass is super flexible. And if you want to distribute some stuff, consider it. But I would say it's also rarely the actual best choice. I would say it's probably almost always a very good choice, but I would say I would argue that there's probably a slightly better choice.
I think I'm not sure. I think it depends on the wrinkle. It really does depend on the wrinkle. For example, you could have a wrinkle where Well, I think I was
But
going
as
to
soon
say
as you're adding wrinkles, you've considered it. You've put the
yes. Oh,
consideration of
yes,
it.
absolutely.
And what I'm saying is that it's the easiest one to implement, but it shouldn't be done without actually considering all the alternatives. Maybe you should be drafting. Maybe it should just be a quick pick and pass thing. Maybe it should just be a fixed cost. Maybe it should be a sealed bid or whatever. I don't know. Just consider the other things.
Yes, I think so. I think the games it will fit well with is, well, I mean, I think it fits with lots and lots and lots and lots. If it's got a good wrinkle, it can be the central part of the game. And if it hasn't got, if you're just looking for distributing something, one item, that's why I think Through the Ages. I mean, we're almost reversing my opinion on it. I think the Through the Ages mechanism there for distributing that territory, it's got the merit of simplicity and speed, and the cost is quite dramatic. It can be quite dramatic if you have got an actual live auction with two players desperately wanting the same territory. So yeah.
Have you ever used this in any games?
Well, I mean, the closest we've got is Fizz, which we talked about the other day, where it's not actually. No, it's not. No,
well,
it's
kind of sealed
not
bid,
really,
except
seal,
that technically you can show the number of cards in a turn order.
Yeah, it's not.
No, it's not at all.
No, I haven't actually really used it at all. I probably would actually. I don't see any reason. Thing is, you have to have some form of currency in it, and so that's a definite. Well, for any auction, you have some form of currency, and relatively few of my games have got a currency in them. Confucius did, but we didn't really have auctions.
I've used turn order until pass in at least one prototype. I don't think, it's certainly not in anything that has progressed very far. Let's put it that way. And
I think that's disappointing that neither of us have used it. I think it's quite disappointing.
I mean, we are but two game designers. We can hardly expect to have used the majority of mechanisms in the world.
I guess that's true.
I would say that for me personally, I feel less drawn towards this than sealed bid. I'm just going to put it out there. I feel less drawn towards this than a whole bunch of other auctions and I think that I really like what Alex mentioned earlier on in the comments, where Alex said, I like a mixture, some bidding open, some hidden, and two types of currency, some you commit before the sealed bid part. That's an interesting idea, and only seen it in my own design so far, I think.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that's a really interesting idea, and thank you for sharing that. And maybe that's something that multiple people can now come together with. It reminds me of the battle system in Scythe, where some of that is visible, but then some of the strength is just done face down, and so you're not entirely sure what your opponent's committing.
I certainly think, because you and I have now looked in a lot of detail at quite a lot of auction mechanisms, we're much more likely, we're more primed to perhaps develop something a little bit more interesting and esoteric.
I don't think I'm more likely to use turn order until pass than I was before. If anything, this has kind of turned me off. It makes me feel like in order to make it interesting, you need to have a really good wrinkle.
Well, I think I'm considering it as, turn order to pass with an appropriate wrinkle is what I think of it as. So if you take the Reiner Knizia approach, there's never just a straight turn order to pass. It's always got something built in there which makes it interesting, because you have to differentiate it from other games. You have to make it interesting for players.
True. You want your game to be different, but when is turn order until pass good? Is it only when there's a wrinkle, or when you want something that's kind of easy to implement as a sort of secondary or even tertiary mechanic? Is that basically when it's best used?
Well, I'll just go back to Powergrid again. I think it's really good when you've got it sufficiently well defined and set in an interesting context. It gives you lots and lots of tactical and strategic decisions to make. And so I think it's really, really good if it's implemented well as a central auction mechanism. But then I think that's true of most auction mechanisms.
But that
actually.
feels like
If
a
they are
cop-out
central.
answer. How do you implement it well? I mean, like,
Well,
let's get to that. When is it bad? When is it implemented badly? Let's look at the reverse. You don't need to name names, but
well, if it's too obvious, if the valuation of the things, if the valuation of the lot is too obvious, particularly if you're in a situation where typically one player will dominate, then it's bad. And I think when you've got a situation where it's because of its implementation, it drags out too long. So typically, when you can just increment by one the previous bid, but the starting value is nowhere near what the players are actually valuing it at, that's where it can be bad. Literally, I mean, and there are
that's a really good point.
I mean, I remember there was a game called Buccaneer. I can't remember if it was actually I can't remember if that was actually turn order to a pass auction. But certainly, it was an auction in it, and it's supposed to be an hour-long game. I know there was a group of friends who actually played it, and they played it for 3 hours because I think it was because people were just incrementing and not getting to the actual value, and the game allowed that to happen. I mean, I may be maligning it, but that's the kind of impression I got. So that is a difficulty. If there's too much granularity and it takes too long, that's where it's bad.
Alex says, like you mentioned, if it's too obvious, then it's bad. But on the flip side, if the value isn't signposted at all, it can really spoil the game for new players. And I absolutely agree with this.
I totally agree.
Because there have been, I would say, 1, maybe 2 games of a game about auctioning cubes after winning an auction to become the auctioneer that went really badly. And that was because at least one person was completely confused about the true value of things. And in the one game that went really badly, everyone was confused except for one person. And so the one person who correctly valued it, and then the other, I think it was like 4 or 5 players who misvalued it and were not willing to go anywhere near the correct value. And so it seems like you've got to do something like you say, oh, by the way, you are able to exchange this for some certain currency, and so that will become the minimum price. Maybe even saying this is the minimum price. Maybe even hard coding that into the game.
That's what I was going to say. I think if you're using turn order until pass, I'm
not talking about turn order until pass specifically. I'm talking about auctions in general at this point.
Yes, I think actually having a minimum value is, well, like a reserve value in English auction. I think those are exactly the way to avoid that problem. It can be a difficulty with sealed bid. I mean, I suppose you can use minimum value in sealed bid as well, can't you? Actually, to be fair, but it is a potential problem with sealed bid, particularly because I'm not quite sure how. Yes, good comment.
Because at least turn order until pass, you get the idea from other people.
It's dynamic. You are actually dynamically gaining
information. If you have at least 2 experienced people at the table, then everyone else can lean in on that.
Yes.
And so that is actually a big advantage with turn order until pass.
Yes.
That with 2 experienced people at the table and 2, 3, however many inexperienced people, you at least get to hear those 2 people competing. So you think, well, it must be worth at least what they're saying. Because maybe one person could be an idiot, but if 2 people, they can't both be idiots.
Well, and that is a danger with sealed bid. You know, you can have a situation in sealed bid where a player just consistently underbids because they're not very good at evaluating things, and that can be. And I think that's one of the reasons why Charlie doesn't like auctions, because she's not confident in making a relatively accurate evaluation of stuff. And so she's really not. She's not keen on auctions for that reason. She always feels. I think that other people have got more more appreciation of value than she has. It's a tricky one.
Yes,
Yes.
let's not get into
I think in QE that may not have
But
said.
in all seriousness, I do think it is a good thing about Turn Order Until Pass that we understand, okay, this is what the landscape is, and the first time I play, I know that it's not. It's also, if it's just one person, maybe they're trying a rogue strategy that can only work for one person. I don't know if I've never played the game before, and if it's a learning game. But yes, I feel like I want to start recapping and wrapping up. So do we have a question of the day? Question of the day. Here's a little question before we go on our way. Question of the day. Okay, my question of the day is: if your hair could be literally any color, and you can just like if you had a weird superpower. Okay, so this is a really weird superpower. You just think of a color, and your hair turns into that color.
Right. Okay.
How often would you change your hair color?
Oh, how? I'm very staid. I probably wouldn't change it more than once a week. No, I probably wouldn't do a lot. I think you might change it to go with your clothes, mightn't you? Yeah, change it to a nice blue or something. I don't know.
I mean, I was thinking similar. Like I was thinking I'd change it to go with my clothes, but like it's anyway. But like I'm thinking like I would typically at conventions be like various shades of red.
Yes,
so I
figured
color red, but like I would be all sorts of red. So like vermilion, like an orangey red, like carmine, burgundy, like just a few strands of burgundy, and it would be like a rainbow all in red.
A corporate color.
I would try to change it to octarine, usually only visible to cats and wizards.
Oh, that's nice. Does that mean that everybody else was thinking you're bald? I don't know.
I think so. I think that's how it works.
It would be weird. Yes.
I mean, I think that normally I would actually change it like in the morning to be like, okay, how do I feel today? And I would reflect. I would make the hair like a slightly happier version of how I feel. So if I'm feeling grueling, it would be like if it's back to normal black, then it's like a cry for help.
Oh dear.
If it's like
real massive emotional signaling. Yes.
But yes, thank you.
You could build a whole society. You could build a whole society on that, couldn't you? Idea. You're signaling your mood with your hair color. Whoa. That would be it.
But it's only if you've got this special power. I mean, to be fair, you could just have different T-shirts.
There's a novel future, right? What is the societal implications of having a superpower that changes your hair color with mood?
I mean, in all seriousness, I think that if someone found out, they would be taking you to a lab or something. But over to you, what are you up to? You can share thoughts if you want to. What are you up to today? Is there something that you need to do? Something that you want to do? Please share. I promise that I care. One thing that I've actually scheduled is tonight I've got a design meeting with Kirsten Lunde. I will to prepare for that, I might do a quick bits of solo testing at some point. I'm going to make sure I get out, even though the weather is very white and not at all sunny here. But I've been told that I need to put SPF on anyway, just because of pollution for a wee bit of time. So I'm going to make sure to do that, just because, apparently having kind of dry skin plus waxing plus sun being out, like it's a whole combination of things that's really bad for. But anyway, the one thing that I absolutely need to do is to get Categorical finished, and that's what I'm planning to do today. And hopefully it won't take it. Yeah, I'll do as much as I can do today, and maybe a wee bit tomorrow, which is Thursday. We'll see how it goes.
Okay, excellent. That's good. I mean, I am going to be looking at these two games. Yeah, which is I think I've sent you this stuff, haven't I?
You have. I'm sorry, I've not.
Don't worry. There's not a huge hurry. I'm hoping to get this one finalised by the end of the month. In fact, I'm hoping to get both of them finalised by the end of the month, really, if I possibly can.
So you're very ahead of schedule for getting it all done by Essen.
Yeah. I think so. Yes, I like the idea. once in a while, being ahead of schedule is pretty unlikely, but I'm feeling that. On the this is now, I haven't changed the cover. This is now called War of the Three Sanchos 1065. This is the book of the day. El Cid and the Reconquista. It's an Osprey Men at Arms book on El Cid. I'm using it because War of the Three Sanchos is the rise of, if you like, of El Cid. So the first time he comes, it's 1465 to 67, so it's right in the period. And this is a nice book because it does actually have if I find it quickly, a picture somewhere of El Cid. Where are we? Oh, come on. A colour plate. It should be a colour. There we go. There we are. We have a picture there of El Cid and somebody else.
Very dramatic.
And the pictures are. It's Angus McBride who does most of these books. Very, very excellent war game illustrator, if you like. The interesting thing about War of the Three Sanchos is that most of the English stuff there's not much in here about that. There's virtually nothing about this war in here. But most of the English sources are in fact completely wrong, and we had to go to Spanish sources. So I have a great debt of thanks to a couple of Spanish guys who did some research for me on what actually happened, and a bit about why, and a bit about the symbols they use, the heraldic symbols that they use as well. So thank you to those. But that's, if you want to look at El Cid and this kind of the Reconquista, this is a good book to start with. It's quite thin.
You recommend it?
Not
Okay.
huge. Nice.
Well, at this point, I would like to do a quick recap and wrap up before we finish up. So I talked about photosynthesis and I think I like player chaos when it's people I know. I think that's what it kind of comes down to. If I was playing with a bunch of people that I knew, and then let's say I played with Chris and McCall, and then they get hanged up on me, and then I lost, I feel like, yeah, we still had a fun evening together. That's okay. But with strangers across the internet, I mean, I might be slightly overreacting, but I feel like I want a more pure thing, like for playing in who is the best at this game environment. I think 2-player mode is where it's at. So that's why I've put my vote for, in 3 months' time, it's going to change for 2 players. And we've currently got 3 votes for 2-player mode and -1 vote because you can downvote things for the 3-player mode. So I'm hoping that it actually gets changed next time so I can prove my superiority, because I'm still undefeated 2 players. And yes, but I talked about my face issues. I talked about we talked about Three Sanchos, playing Inferno, being in a recent convention, the interactivity of auctions, how players decide the value, which gives them a really fascinating decision point. Simple rules, deep ramifications. We talked about Powergrid, the emergence, how it is kind of less dramatic than Sealed Bid, which has the most examples on Board Game Geek with 96, I think, compared to 50-something. And but there are 4,000 uncategorized auction games, as Alex pointed out. At least 4,000, because there might be games that aren't categorized as auctions at all. We talked about High Society, where you don't pick up stuff and what a change that makes. For Sale, where it's beautiful because it's multiple lots, and then as soon as you pass, you take back half your money, but you need to give half the money to the bank, and then you still get something, which can be like, wahaha, I've got something which is almost as good as the winner, and they don't get their money back. Through the Ages, where he said it's not very dramatic, but because it's turn-based, maybe it's more in keeping with the game, maybe it's actually the best solution for that problem. And turn order matters, maybe that feels a bit sad, and there is a little bit of randomness there, potentially. If people start off very low and then you go +1, oh, I'm going to bid 2, 3, 4, 5 until it gets to 27. We used to do that in Monopoly, true story. But there were things that we started doing, and then I think like we realized that it's like at the point where if I think it's 10, but I'm going to start at half the value. That's what my basic thing was, because no one's going to bid less than half, but there's a small chance that someone
Yes,
might
you
let
might.
me have it
To be
for.
fair, Monopoly is an example of turn order to a pass auction, isn't it? Or it can be.
Well,
There's no actual
it's
rule, is there?
not clear. That's
It's
the one
normally
part of the
implemented that
rules
way.
where it's not turn order until pass. It is English auction,
Mm.
but if someone in an English auction, it can slow down in the
Yes.
same way.
Yeah.
It can slow down in the same way if the real value is 30 and someone says, okay, do I hear 11? Do I hear 12?
Yeah.
And then we just do that. We talked about you can't make it too obvious, you can't make it too opaque. And then we wrapped up talking about changing hair colors and LCID and what we're working on generally. Things are going, and Alex at the end has a question about categorical. Is that the shortest title of your recent games? It's one of them. I would say that I've got games now which have normal length titles, which includes Yogi Party and includes all the LDEC games. Yogi Party isn't confirmed to be released or anything. It's just something I pitched. And anything that, like, if the title is suggested by an outside source, or Last Bug Standing in the Circle of Doom.
Yeah, well, that was, to be fair, that's one of mine. But I was echoing the long titles of their seasons.
Yes, I think that is shorter than any of my recent non-LDEC games. Yes, it is. But to be fair, again, a game about Keats comical creatures and trying to identify them after some mixed noises was published in French as Créature. So that was very short. But yes. Please, thank you, everyone. Spread the word if you think that this has been useful or you think that other people might get value out of it. And yes, thank you, Alan, for being here.
And in a fortnight's time, no auctions.
Whoa. We're talking about automatic resource growth.
Yes.
I will actually have to look at that
what
quickly.
The hell that is. Yes, I agree. Yeah.
I am stuffed by Bez in all of the places. If you're watching this, you know where I am. There's a whole bunch of stuff scrolling along. Alan?
And I'm on alan.paul.co.uk, or I'm Bentonfish on Twitter, and you can find me on my blog on Spice Games as well if you need to get in touch with me. Email's the best for me. I'm old-fashioned.
I should add your email to that little thing then. Hold on, your email. Alan@alanpaul.co.uk.
That's the one. Yes, that's great.
I will chuck it in there very quickly. People.
I think
there
people
we go.
do. There we go. That's perfect. Lovely.
And so at this point, I think there's nothing more to say other than, as always, bye, 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Blue, blue, bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye, 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye, bye, everyone.
See you again soon.